have European elections coming up. The elections for the European Parliament and the selection of the top jobs in the Commission and the other institutions is turning out to be divisive. It is pitting many of the newer member states from Central Europe against some of the older, more established states from Western Europe. So there is a worry that if left unchecked, those disagreements may lead to some sort of a separation of the EU into two classes of membership, the older member states and the newer ones. That's just one worry. The other worry is how well the populists will do in the European elections. There are reasons to believe that they'll do better than in all the previous elections, and therefore the next Parliament and possibly the next European Commission too will be far less wedded to the idea of European Union and European integration. There may well be populists in them who will be intent on breaking up the EU, so that's another challenge. The issue in US-European relations that gets the most attention, it's usually President Trump's demand for more money for defense. That's actually not the biggest divisive issue. The reality is the current president is hardly the only president or the first one to demand higher defense spending. The real thing that Europeans worry about with regard to current US policy is, again, not defense spending. It's the apparent lack of belief in the United States that international institutions and a strong global order are good for the United States and good for the rest of the world. There seems to be a belief permeating out of Washington that the right way to relate to each other as states is through sort of a naked economic and political competition for influence. Now, we Europeans have a serious problem with it for two reasons. One, we think it's not a good deal globally. We believe that when countries collaborate, trade, and jointly seek solutions to problems such as nuclear proliferation, we are more effective and more successful than if we try to do that individually or if we actually compete against one another. But an even more personal problem, if you will, for us Europeans that comes out of that we have with the new US policy concerns the security of Europe. We have tried the competitive model. We have tried through most of the 20th century, or well, first half of the 20th century, to compete with each other, to balance each other. And it ended in 2 world wars. So we have set up the European Union, the sort of world's, I guess, closest form of cooperation and integration that this number of member states have ever agreed into and entered into. Not because we're romantic and into experiments. We set it up because we think it's the only way to keep Europe stable and secure. And to hear President Trump now say the EU is a bad deal, it's a mistake, and collaboration, integration of this sort is not the way forward, that affects our security. We worry that if he finds followers in Europe, that if his ideas really catch on, that our own continent may yet suffer the most, perhaps more so than Middle East, Asia, or others. The fact that the Europeans now have a real problem with Russian policy isn't because of something the United States told them to do or asked them to do. The reality is what the Russians appear to be up to, which is essentially breaking up the existing European order, including the 2 institutions that dominate it, NATO and the EU, is first and foremost bad for Europe. Because once it is established as a new operating principle in Europe that states can do whatever they please to each other simply because they don't like the other country's politics or its leadership, that it's okay to use force to attack another country just because you don't like it. Once that becomes, once again, the operating principle in Europe, then we're in real trouble. There's plenty of grievances going back hundreds of years in Europe to go around, and if this system, these rules of operation that have been in place in Europe, that thou shalt resolve conflicts peacefully, thou shalt integrate your economies so that you have fewer structural reasons to go into competition and conflict. If that goes away, then we stand to suffer more than anybody else. So I don't see European policy on Russia changing. It's primarily for our own security self-interest that we have adopted a fairly hard line on Russian annexation of Crimea and its aggression against Donbass, because if that becomes the new rule, we all suffer.